Welcome to Offset. Larry and the big man, Jay Caulfield, two-time Stanley Cup champion and Sportsnet hockey analyst. And I'm Larry Richard with the Big K Morning Show on KDK, the world's first commercial radio station. But you knew that, Jay.
I did know that, yep, but this is still great to hear.
And we're going to jump right in with a familiar name here in Pittsburgh as the season gets underway. Pierre McGuire is going to be back and giving his analysis from a number of perspectives as a executive in hockey and a player back in the day. Pierre, welcome back to the Berg.
Oh, you know what, Larry? It's an amazing honor and a thrill and a privilege, first of all, to be on with you and Jay, but secondly, to be back with the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. I'm thrilled by it. I'm really excited about it.
You know, Pierre, when we've said we had you on early in our start of this podcast, and we got to talk about how you got to where you're at, and probably the hardest working guy truly in the game of hockey with everything you've done. But when you look right now part of the Penguin broadcast team, if I look at the Penguins coming up, and I've watched all the exhibition games, I've been there, watched them live, I know everybody's kind of putting them down in a lot of different ways, but I'm not so sure about that. If you get Crosby, again, leading the way, it's going to be about goaltending. And we know, Pierre, a part of developing the youth, the movement that's part of it, but goaltending is so key. It was a tough year for them last year, but I think this year they're going to make it be a different mark right now.
First of all, I credit Coach Dan Muse and his staff. Jay, they're a hard-working, industrious group. They've broken a lot of young players into this roster to start the year. They've gone on the road and won some really tight games. They've won some good games at home against some quality opponents that are urgent to have great starts. To me, goaltending is a huge part of it. And whether Tristan Jarry, the long-term answer, whether it's Artur Siloff being one of the long-term answers, or whether it's Sergei Murashov being part of it, they've got pretty good goaltending. I hadn't even talked about Yoel Blomqvist. So I think Pittsburgh's in a really good spot in their goaltending position. And I watched Murashov play a lot, whether it was down in Wheeling in the East Coast League or last year in the American Hockey League, obviously preseason this year. I know he catches as a silly sider with his wrong hand compared to most other goalies. But what strikes me the most is there's a Jonathan Quick aspect to his game. There's a Dominic Hasek aspect to his game. There's a refined aspect to his game. So it's athleticism, it's quickness, it's flexibility, and there's a Marc-Andre Fleury aspect to his game. This kid has a chance to be a superstar down the road. He really does.
Yeah, that said, we assume, because certainly you and Jay in particular so close to the game, but for the average fan, who is Dan Muse?
Well, he's a kid that grew up in Boston, played at Curry College, and grew up in Canton, Mass. I watched him a little bit when he was a young coach growing up in USA Hockey. Watched him learn and be taught by Peter Laviolette in Nashville and obviously in New York and Washington. I think he's more of a professorial type of approach to it, Larry, rather than being a hardcore in-your-face hockey guy. There's nothing wrong with that. I love the staff that he surrounded himself with. Todd Nelson is somebody that was there when Jay and I were working there. Mike Stothers was a very formidable player and has been a very good coach for a long time at the minor levels in particular. Nick Bonino, just to help them with face-offs. And I've known Rich Clune since he was a kid that played for Canada and the World Under 18 in 2005 in Česká Budějovice and Pilsen in the Czech Republic. And he's just one of those character guys you love to have around your staff. So Dan Muse is the head coach, but he's surrounded himself with some really competent people. And I think he'll make a big difference with these young players that Pittsburgh are going to be breaking in this year.
You know, Pierre, too, we mentioned goaltending. We talked about Dan Muse. Let's just work our way up. And when you look at the blue line, first of all, right off the bat, the Ryan Graves thing, it just never found his footing here. And then through camp, pretty much the same way as we saw the previous 2 years. And you don't want to see anybody be banished, whatever. He's just down in the farm, if you will, down in Wilkes-Barre. But that's the first move of, okay, they're doing what they need to do. Then you see what they brought in. Now they've got 6 right-handed defensemen, 3 lefty on the roster, I still believe, right now. But I'm really kind of intrigued with, you brought in Clifton. I've liked Clifton's game when he was in Boston and you see him in Buffalo. That's one piece. But Matt Dumba, in the exhibition games that I watched, was really good, in my opinion, and probably looking like any other player. It's a fresh start. I think he's going to add that little element that Grzelcyk brought from the left side, but he brings more than that. So I think that blue line is going to be an interesting thing, especially to start the season.
I love what you just said because it's absolutely true, Jay. And the biggest thing about Matt Dumba, he wants to prove people wrong. A lot of people thought he didn't have much game left. I think he still has game left because he still has his legs. And there's a physical intensity to his game that never got enough credit. Kid that played in the Western Hockey League, and he's pretty darn tough. The thing that I like about Connor Clifton in particular, watch him play at Quinnipiac for Rand Pecknold, watch him break into the National Hockey League in Buffalo. Physical, hard, in your face, not overly large, but can still skate and play. So I think there's some good components to his game. The biggest thing I think for the Pittsburgh is making sure Carlson and Letang don't make this an easy team to be forechecked against. Those guys have to have their legs moving and they have to have their puck movement game going. And if they do, that'll help the Penguins a lot.
Yeah, and one more piece of that too. Wotherspoon was another guy that was brought in. I've always liked Ryan Shea too, and St. Ivany. They're the two guys that are kind of left over from the last regime, if you will, but young players that still are trying to make their mark. I know, and I think Shea and Wotherspoon on the left side, that's a little bit of a plus. There's going to have to be somebody, Pierre, and you know it, and I know it. Playing on your offside is difficult. And when I look at the 6D on the right side, it's going to be hard to keep one or two of those guys out each and every night.
The one guy that can make the adjustment, because I saw him do it for Sweden for so many years, is Erik Karlsson. You know, he can play the right side. He can play the left side. He can really skate. You know, obviously after the Matt Cook situation a long time ago, I'm not sure he ever really got that great acceleration that he used to have, but he's still quick enough. But he can definitely make the transition from playing the right side to the left side. I'm glad you brought up Wotherspoon. He's an interesting player. He's not a young player. He's got a lot of experience, played a lot of years in the American Hockey League on some good teams and not so good teams. So he's been kicked around a little bit. And you know, guys like that, Jay, they want to, again, prove, like a lot like Matt Dumba, they want to prove people wrong. And I think that's a positive part of the Penguins going forward is the amount of guys who want to prove a lot of people wrong.
And we're with Pierre McGuire. I want to remind you, One Team Media produces this podcast with Brian Hess at the command. Ryan Jorgen, want to thank Logan Douglas, too, and our strategic partner, Odyssey Pittsburgh, with Michael Spacciapoli.
Also, the Rourke Automotive Group. We can't thank Dave Rourke enough for being our title sponsor. Mention again, the Rourke Advantage, lifetime state inspection, lifetime oil change, and engine warranty. But again, they do a great job from beginning to end. And thanks, Dave, for being our sponsor.
So, Pierre, tell us about the work that you're going to do in Pittsburgh with the broadcast team here.
I'm really excited to be working almost 41 games for sure with Paul Steigerwald, sometimes with Colby Armstrong. Our maiden launch happened a little while ago during the preseason, Larry. We had a lot of fun with it. After the second period, now it'll be mostly the pregame show. There'll be some postgame show activity, and there'll be some special assignments. So I'm really excited about it. It's a chance to get my feet wet back in the marketplace in Pittsburgh. It's a team that's near and dear to my heart. Jay knows that. I always come back from Mario Lemieux fantasy camp. I'm so proud to say that I'm part of that. And I just am excited because, you know, the one thing about this Pittsburgh team, a lot of people are writing them off. This is part of how you retool a team. It doesn't happen overnight. They got a lot of good young players. They're going to be guys you've never heard of before playing for this team. There's going to be guys like Ville Koivunen, who's a tremendous talent, who's going to get a chance to play with Sidney Crosby. And people are going to say, where'd this guy come from? He comes from Oulu, Finland. He's a fantastic talent, which is up in the Arctic Circle, by the way. It's pretty far away from Helsinki. And so I'm psyched to watch these young guys grow into what Dan Muse and Kyle Dubas want for this team to be long-term.
Well, as the late, great Mike Lang would say, oh, yeah, Staggy, now we got Pierre McGuire on the team. This is good news for Pens fans. Jay?
Yeah, and Pierre, again, you're certainly going to bring an element that is hard to find. So they're all blessed. We're all blessed to have you. And you just touched on the forwards. Let's move up. We went from goaltending to defense to the forwards. And when you watch it, it's really hard. You mentioned we know rebuild, but man, it's really hard when you've got, it's a blend, right? It's veterans and there's youth. You got to find a way to sprinkle it in. And you take the injury, Brian Rush now out for the first couple of weeks, but it gives an opportunity. And when I look at that, some of the players that to me that are older, Blake Lizotte for me, a guy nonstop. I find it hard to pull a guy like that out of a lineup. You know what he's going to bring each and every night. The guy that I really like is Duar. He comes in, plays a hard physical game, can move up and down the ladder. He's got that character, that old school kind of character that I think that's going to be a guy that's going to be hard to pull him out as well. And the intriguing one for me again, one more time, is Brazeau, right? He was in Boston, bumped around Minnesota, but again, another guy that's getting an opportunity with Malcolm, Pierre. I mean, but when you watch him on the ice, he gets to the front of the net, making plays, hard on the puck. To me, that might be a pickup that I know we talked about. It's size, 6'6", but I really liked them in the games that I saw.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about Brazeau, and you're absolutely right about his ability to get to the other team front of the net and in the slot. You think about potentially Anthony Mantha playing on the left side on that line. So you got Mantha, who's a huge person. You got Malkin, who's a big man, and you got Brazeau. So let's just say they're able to get their cycle game going. That's going to take a lot of pressure off of, let's say it's Koivunen, Raquel, and Crosby, because there won't be as many matchups against those guys, because you're going to have your bigger, more stout guys going against Brazeau, Malkin, and Mantha. So I find that interesting, number one. Number two, and I hope you guys agree with me, Ben Kindle's been fantastic this preseason for the Penguins. He's been fantastic. He's a young kid. I watched him play junior in Calgary. A lot of people didn't think he would skate well enough and that he wasn't going to be big enough. Well, clearly, a lot of those people got it wrong. He's going to continue to evolve and get bigger and faster and stronger. But his hockey sense is exquisite. He can play center. He can play wing. He's really talented. So I bet he gets a 9-game test drive and potentially they send him back to the World Junior. But the one thing that was so apparent, Larry and Jay, from this preseason, this is a team that will work hard. And Larry, it's because of what Jay said about guys like Blake Lizotte and Connor Dewar. Those guys bring the heat. They know how they have to play to survive in the league. So I'm more encouraged about how this team will look as we get through the first 20 games. A lot of people are dooming and glooming it. I'm not in a rush to do that with this group.
You know, in hockey, as you both know, the coaching changes come with more frequency maybe than any other sport. Mike Sullivan with 2 Stanley Cups did a great job here, but sometimes it's time to make a change. And how much can that energize a team, even with, savvy veterans like Crosby, Letang, and Malkin?
A lot. And it happened, and Jay was there when Badger Bob Johnson came in. It revitalized the entire organization. I was fortunate enough to play a little role with that, but Bob brought in all this positive energy, changed the way the practices were done, changed the way we broke down the opposition, changed the way we made lines and roles for players. And the guys bought in. Jay can speak to that. He was one of the guys that definitely bought in, and it changed the whole dynamic of the organization. I think that'll happen here with Dan Muse. We talked about more of a educated point of view. Mike had been there a long time, Larry. I mean, that's not a knock on Mike. It's not his fault. Heck, he did an amazing job. But the last 3 years that Mike was there, to be fair, they didn't make the playoffs. So I think the message started to wear out on the players a little bit. And again, that's normal. Hockey's crazy that way. The days of having guys stay 12 to 14 or 15 years with one organization, those are long gone, long gone.
Yeah, just to add to that, as a fan of the sport and a fan of the Penguins, we took it for granted. We're going to the playoffs every year, right? And when you don't make it, a couple of years rolling, people get antsy.
Yeah, and Pierre, we talked about you being part of a regime as well. I think it's fine when you're a player that's a bubble player, or there's talk that they're trying to make a youth movement. Guys like Tomasino, Novak, who got injured after a couple games, look good and then goes down. But when a new staff comes in, right, Pierre, that's you. If you're that third and fourth line guy and they're looking to make changes and your top 6 is loaded with veterans that, are they going to move them? Or are they not going to move them? You really have to make that impression. You talked about Kindle, and I totally agree with that, Pierre. But you got Tomasino, who all of a sudden has to play a game. I believe they're going to be in a line together, Kindle, Tomasino, and Novak tomorrow night. They're the kind of players that had to get through camp, weather the storm, and impress Dan Muse, who, again, certainly had no problem, getting across to the players what he wants. And I think those guys stood out as well. So, I mean, you're building a lineup here, and it's like you got to get through a new GM, a new coach, whatever it is, every day. There's no free lunch anywhere if you fall into that category as that type of player.
Spot on. You couldn't be more correct. Larry, I don't want to embarrass Jay, but I just want to tell a quick story. During training camp in 1990-91, we used to have breakfast every morning before we go to the arena at the old Vista Hotel. It's now the Westin in Pittsburgh. And we'd always meet in Bob's suite. And Bob would say all the time at these breakfasts, and in the room would be Craig, Barry Smith, Rick Patterson, Rick Keogh, Scotty Bowman, and myself. That's it. That's all. Nobody else was allowed in the room. And I remember once at the breakfast, he's saying, I got to have this Caulfield on board. I got to have this because his enthusiasm and his work habits, and it makes a difference. So when you get a new staff, if you don't have guys that are prepared to buy into the message and also work the way you need them to, it's not going to work. But watching this preseason, Larry, in particular, and Jay, you know what I'm talking about, guys are buying into what Dan Muse is selling. Now, that might not last the whole year, but right now, to get off to a good start, it's worked. And that's positive.
You know, Pierre, but you made a point, and first of all, that's a great story to hear. So thanks for saying that. I was just going to say, though, you mentioned it. You said it wasn't Mike Sullivan's fault. It's almost like everything runs its course. And probably Mike Sullivan, for him to go to New York, that's a breath of fresh air for him as well, right? So, and beat on the East Coast. But when you aren't successful 2-3 years in a row, multiple years in a row, you kind of need to, like, right, Pierre, you better, a change is made, and you got to find a way to fit yourself in. But it also does take a strong voice. I think Dan Muse put that out there right away. You heard all the guys talk about the practice because you've got veteran guys. And Pierre, again, as a coach, you understand, even when you're running drills with guys in the summertime, if you're not direct and you're not to the point and are demanding of what you want, players are going to walk all over you, right? They just do. It's the way it is.
Yeah, but I think you remember our 92 team. You know, I ran all the practices that year, and it was like boot camp. I mean, we were hard on it. We were hard on it pretty.
And because Pierre, if you weren't, I'm telling you, it's the way. It's like a kid keep, eating chocolate, and you go, oh, you can't have any more chocolate, but they keep eating chocolate. you gotta put the hammer down, right? You gotta be strict and stern about what you're doing. Like, again, running practices, Pierre, you ran great practices. You have great players, Hall of Famers, and you got to make sure you kind of set the tone at the respect level that you earn that respect. Because if you don't, players of every sport will walk all over you. I think he's done, as you said, Pierre, Dan Muse has done a great job controlling camp, getting everybody to buy in, and a big part, too, coming in after a team has not been successful for multiple years. You better buy in, right? You kind of have to.
You know what I think helped him, Larry and Jay, a lot is the fact he spent so much time with Peter Laviolette and also with Phil Housley. Phil was a head coach in Buffalo. Phil's been an assistant coach in a bunch of different places. Phil won a World Junior Gold as a head coach for Team USA over in Russia. Not an easy thing to do. So if you're Dan Muse, you learn from that. Then you're around Laviolette, who's a Stanley Cup winner in 2006 with Carolina, and he went to the final in 2010 with Philadelphia. So you're learning organizational standards with guys that have been there before. And if you're Dan Muse and you never played at a real high level, you need those mentors. And he's had that. And I think that helps him a lot too. One of the best hires, though, is getting Todd Nelson. And Jay, you were a teammate of his. You know, I spent a lot of time around Todd back in those days because he was a call-up player. He was down in Muskegon or he was up in Pittsburgh. And he was a treat to work with because he was a sponge. He wanted to stay as long as he could. And having guys like that know they have to work hard every single day, that's infectious around a team as well.
Yeah, and Pierre, Jay Caulfield, disciplined, unrelenting. That's the same attitude he had when he was getting Mario prepared for his great comeback, right, big man?
That's true.
Right? Larry, I'm going to tell you a Jay Caulfield story now that'll rock your world. We're on a long Western trip, and we had a couple days off in Detroit. And my phone rang in my room. No cell phones in those days, and it's Jay Caulfield. He says, is there any ice over at the rink? I said, I got to check. I don't know. So I call over to the arena. I said, yeah, nobody's using the rink. This is at old Joe Louis Arena. We go to the rink, and Jay has these training boxing gloves. So I'm the punching bag, and he's the puncher. The next day, because I didn't have pads on it, Jay did. We started by grappling a little bit, and then he started punching. It was like Rocky Balboa, And all of a sudden, the next day, I tried to get out of bed. I couldn't move. I looked in the mirror. My shoulders were covered with blood vessels that had broken from Jay grabbing onto my shoulder.
Well, he did come from Philly, You can get them, Rock.
Well, Pierre,
You know
you
what's
know.
great about that? I don't know, Jay. I don't know if you remember, but the lights were out and they only had the security lights on the building. So we're sitting in this dark Joe Louis arena.
That is a pretty good.
That's true.
It's kind of true. No, that is kind of funny. It's very true. Pierre, I truly appreciate you going there with, because anybody, we're going into Detroit, and you know who's there, right? Pierre, and it's not easy, but Pierre was great, and I certainly appreciate it. But there is something special about being in an arena that one moment could hold 20,000 people, and then here we are in there by ourselves with the lights not on. It's kind of a wild thing as an athlete. You're in there and you're looking at the building, right, Pierre? It's a special,
Yeah, it was really
it's a special kind of thing that it's always impressive inside of NHL arenas. Pretty nice.
Yeah, so what kind of role, I'll ask both of you, does this day and age in hockey have for somebody, who's out there to protect the stars, the big stars like a Sidney Crosby?
Well, Pierre, I know what I would say. I mean, you look at what's going on around the league. The Florida-Tampa situation over 2 games, right? That's just they're just going after. They were just going after each other for 2 games. Now, look, that's a different team rolling in, right, Pierre? Again, the Penguins right now are not built. I mean, what we see on the roster, they're not built. They're going out, they're playing a game, and they got to be doer. Like, there's guys that have the heart and desire, but they're not, right, Pierre? They're not the guy that's going to go after Matt Remke and stuff like that. But also, the roster, Mike Sullivan might put something different out on the ice when they go into New York. Right, Pierre? It's still something that'll be talked about here until something happens. If something happens, that's when you'll see Boko Amama maybe get called back up or whatever it might be. But you adjust the lineup to what you see Pittsburgh's bringing. I don't know what we're going to see, but it's still, to me, it's still something that's needed in the game.
You know what's amazing, Larry? I got to agree with everything Jay just said. And here's one other side of it. You talk about Tampa and Florida, and that's kind of a big bust thing around the league right now, because that was bordering on actually being very, very dangerous for a lot of guys. I watched Montreal and Ottawa last week from Quebec City on a Tuesday night. That thing was out of control. It was really, really dangerous. And Montreal now, after playing Washington in the playoffs last year, Jay and Larry, they realize they can't have guys like Tom Wilson running around, and they can't have guys, trying to goon them up. So Montreal brought in the Jack-Eye brothers. They brought in some tough guys. I'm telling you right now, Larry, if you do not have a nuclear deterrent on your team in this league today, your star players are going to get mauled. You need to have a nuclear deterrent on every team, and if you don't, it's going to be a problem.
So didn't Ottawa, and I agree, Pierre, I agree with that. So did they not pick up McDermott? Didn't Ottawa just go get McDermott?
They did. They got rid of Zach McEwen for McDermott, and the reason why they did it is McEwen got beat up pretty bad by Arbor Jack-Eye. And so they don't need that in Ottawa. They know what their team, and they don't want Brady Tkachuk fighting every night. So they go out and they bring in, and McDermott, you played against his father. He's a big, strong, tough kid. He's not a great player. He's a really great nuclear deterrent. And he'll bring the heat every time he has to. Like, that's just how he plays.
They kind of have a lineup, but Brady Tkachuk's going to play his game his way, always on the edge. So it's going to stir up stuff inside of it. So, Larry, it's a really great point. And I feel like Pierre does, and I still think it's something that's needed, and it seems to be revving up again across the league in certain areas. And now, obviously, Montreal, Ottawa, little rivalry, little thing going on there. We know the Florida-Tampa thing, but there's enough going on between here and Philly. There's Delorier in Philly, Olivier in Columbus, Wilson. They're going to run around. I think you need something as well, and that's what we might see a change.
One other. Yeah, just to put it in perspective, because Kyle Dubas came from Toronto. Toronto last year, after they had another playoff sizzle out, their general manager went right public and he said, we're changing our DNA. So they went out and got Dakota Joshua. They went out and got bigger guys in the back end. They signed Simon Benoit, he's like a poor man's Ulf Samuelsson. They've brought in guys that are going to go after you physically. Nicholas Waugh, they brought him in, big strapping center iceman. They signed Scotty Lawton. Like, you go look at some of the things Toronto did. They addressed the need to what Jay's talking about, Larry, to get more physical and get bigger.
Well, Pierre, you would have appreciated I got to be a fly on the wall with Lyle Odeline and Jay talking about the good old days. And, Lyle's eyes started to light up, so I had to slide further and further away. But it was fun to hear those stories behind the scenes.
First of all, Odie was a vastly underrated player. He was a really good junior in Medicine Hat. He was Moose Jaw. But here's a good, I'll tell you one, you can look it up. All the great players that played for the Montreal Canadiens, hundreds of years of great players. Lyle Odeline still has the most points for a Montreal Canadiens defenseman in one game. And the only reason I know that, it was against my Hartford Whaler team. And I went nuts after the game. And we were going on we had won the night before in Quebec City. We come into Montreal, we get beat bad. And then we go into Winnipeg, Calgary, Vancouver, and Edmonton. We got points in every single game. One in Winnipeg, lost in OT in Calgary, one in Vancouver, one in Edmonton. Jay, what I like to say is I was so ticked off after the Odeline game, I brought the guys to the rink the next morning before we flew to Winnipeg, and we practiced at 6 a.m. And Jay knows, when I was mad and I skated with the players, and we had a tough practice.
One final note, he said he got a hat trick, and he was pretty excited about that, and he went back to the hotel, and all they wanted to talk about was the fight he had also.
Yeah, the fight he had with Tony Twist. He had whatever. He had a hat trick in the game, and all they talked about was just fighting. Yeah, so, right, Lyle's a great guy. Lyle's a great guy and played the game, right, Pierre, back all the way he needed to and how he had to, and just a great guy, and still in the city of Pittsburgh, and we're happy he was on with us, too, and joined that. But I do think you can have a roster be what it is, but I will always say I would just have to believe that everybody in the lineup would be happier, except the one guy that's going to get bumped out. Who are you going to pull out of the lineup? But everybody else across the board, knowing they have somebody on the bench or out on the ice with them, it'll make a difference. And somewhere during this year, you'll see something like that take place. I'm sure it always happens, Pierre. There's always one game that triggers it, and they'll make a lot. Then there'll be a change.
You made the good point, though. Philadelphia's got artillery, and look at who their coach is. Rick Tocchet, he's not a shrinking violet. Look at Columbus, who their coach is. Dean Evison, he likes a physical brand of hockey. You go around the Eastern Conference, but in particular the Metropolitan Division, it may not be the strongest division, but it might have the most mean guys in a division.
Yep.
It might.
Yep.
Well, that said, let's take a look at the Metropolitan. Who do you think in the offseason made the most moves to improve their team?
I still think Columbus has done a really good job. I give Donnie Waddell a lot of credit. They missed the playoffs by 2 points last year, Larry. I think they have a legitimate chance to take a step forward and potentially make the playoffs. The Washington Capitals are going to be a tough out. They've done a magnificent job with their product down in Hershey. They're developing prospects internally. They don't really have to make a lot of pro moves because of all those prospects coming along. I thought the New York Rangers was outside of the coaching staff, I still thought they had moves to make, so we'll see how that goes. The Islanders are a team that wait and see. Nobody really knows how that's going to play out. The Devils should be very good. I know all the pundits are saying Carolina should be great, Larry. I'm not sure about how great they're going to be. Losing Brent Burns is pretty significant. Roslovic was a really good second-line player for them. They've lost some guys. And they sent one of their top prospects, which I was surprised by this, Bradley Nadeau, back to their American Hockey League team in Chicago. I was really surprised by that. So I don't know. It's a wait and see in the Metro. The one thing I'd say is based on what, and I'm not a homer, but based on what I saw from Pittsburgh, if they work like that the whole year, they're going to cause a lot of heartache for a lot of teams.
And we know it's only preseason, but you're certainly. And that's where people go, well, it's preseason. Well, if you're Dan Muse, you want to make sure you're not going 1-4. You want it the other way. You want to get on a good roll where you're bringing it, the excitement and the positivity that goes with it. Like a comeback win against Buffalo late, in overtime in Crosby. And then the top guys shine. That's what's amazing to me, Pierre, still, that Sidney Crosby, when you watched him in this preseason, it looks exactly the same every year, every camp he comes out of. It's really an amazing story of an athlete that's able to produce and perform the way he can right now.
One of the things I think going through Sid, remember 2014 is the last time they had Olympic hockey with NHL players. Canada dominated. Sid was a big part of that, obviously. Chris Kunitz was a big part of that. Crosby in 2010 with the golden goal. I think for a lot of these star players in the league, the Olympics is a big carrot in front of them that's dangling, so it's pushing them to elevate the pace of their game. But he knows he's a Pittsburgh guy, and he has to set the tone for that team. Because you were always with Mario. Think about it. When we needed somebody to really buck us up, Mario was always there to do it, Jay. You know that, and it was so critically important for our group. So I think Sid's much the same. The one thing that's I think critically important for this team, no matter what happens this season, people have to recognize that Sidney Crosby cares so much about the city and about the organization. And all the rumors are not from him. I know what his agent said. If he wanted to really leave, he'd go tell them, I want to leave, move me. They haven't moved him because they'll still think he wants to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
And the great tradition they have of sending the players out to greet their season ticket holders. And, of course, he was asked about that, and he just made it clear, I love this city. I'm not going anywhere, which calmed the fan base tremendously. And then, lo and behold, driving by is a guy named Mario Lemieux, who stops, looks out the window, gives a little salute. The hockey gods have been so good to us, Pierre, as you know, with Mario Lemieux. Then the whole story about Sid and living in his house, and it's kind of passing the baton and the torch. They got to play together here. I mean, we've been so fortunate, and I think Penguins fans recognize that Sid's great because he's the hardest working guy on the team, too. That's not an accident.
Yeah. I think even with everything we're saying, Pierre, I look at the beginning of this season and what it means, and we all know here, this first 10 games is going to really what sets the tone. Maybe you want to give a little, but I'm going by 10 games. Inside that first 10 games, if it's flat at all, that's when you're going to see the rumor mill kick up even more than what we were talking about before. They got to have a great start. They got to get off to a real solid start. And I do believe with the way he's coaching them, the way they're playing, that hard work is going to be out there each and every night. But you got to find the results. And I think that first 10 is going to be really, really big, Pierre.
I agree. No, spot on. I was thinking more like 15, but 10, I'll cede you that. I'll cede you the first 10 is really important. There can't be any flatlining. You had division games. You got tough opponents. You got teams that you're playing against early that haven't made the playoffs and want to make the playoffs. Sullivan was a big acquisition for the New York Rangers. That staff with Joe Sacco and David Quinn, all three of those guys have been head coaches in the National Hockey League. David Quinn was a fantastic college coach for a long time. Joe Sacco was a very honorable player, but he's been a really good coach for a long time. That's a good staff. I always felt this, Jay, and I don't know what your take is on it. Larry, I'm curious what you think. I always felt that a coach had to affect 10 points in the standings to 20 points. So whether it's 5 games or 10 games, I always thought a coach had to affect at least 10 to 20 points over the course of an 82-game schedule. How do they do that? Managing their roster, managing their matchups, picking the right guys to play that night, making sure they had the right schematic, right in-game adjustments, whatever you think. This is where Dan Muse and the staff have a chance to affect that many games. And if they do, this team will be vastly improved. So it sounds like a lot, but if you break it down into games, so if they can affect 5 to 10 games as a staff in a positive way, they're head and shoulders above where they were last year.
Yeah, and they got into trouble the last few seasons by having slow starts, and it seemed like they were chasing themselves the rest of the way.
Yeah, that part's true, Larry. And I was going to say, by the way, Pierre, when I make that comment, if it's something if there's one part of the game that's not looking right, if it's the goaltending isn't where they need it to be, I guess I'm pulling that point, like that's what's going to trigger. You're going to see something. Goaltending has to be, in my opinion, has to show an elite level right off the bat, right? It can't be because it's too vulnerable of a spot right now, right? The spotlight's going to be on it. So when I say that, I'm saying, hey, if Jarry can pick up what he did the last 14 games last year and perform at that level, they're going to find themselves in a good shape. If we find that that's not going well, because I believe the work ethic, everything you mentioned, Pierre, I believe the way they're going to come into this opening of the season, they're going to be hard to play against. They're going to play the game extremely hard, fast, on pucks, and they got skill to kind of finish off. They need goaltending to be at its best.
Yeah, consistency in goal matters a ton. And for whatever reason, Tristan hasn't been great to start a lot of games. He's going to have to be a lot better. I watched Seeloff all playoff long last year in the American Hockey League play for Abbotsford. He was really good. He wasn't a little bit good. He was really good. And even if you go back to what he did the year before in Vancouver playing for our friend Rick Tocchet, Seeloff was very, very good in the playoffs for Vancouver. So because of a Thatcher Demko injury. So I look at it like they've got insurance, and I think eventually the starting goalie for the Pittsburgh Penguins is going to be Murazov anyway. So I'm encouraged for where the position is internally for the organization for a lot of years.
Yep. I'm just curious, Pierre, coming back to Pittsburgh, outside of hockey and your love for the game, what do you love about Pittsburgh and the region?
The Strip District in particular, the people around the city, their passion for the sport, walking up and down the hills. You know, I used to go to I know it's not there anymore, but I used to go to the Common Plea all the time for dinner. So I like that. Back in the day, early on, I used to go to the Gandy Dancer with Bob Johnson and Martha Johnson, and we'd sit there and have brunch and have so much fun there over at Station Square. Coming in from the airport, coming through the tubes. There's so much that I love about it. The golf is great. I know Jay's a scratch golfer now because that's all he does. You know, so it's okay. But I think the fan base, the fans in Pittsburgh make the city fantastic. They really do.
I have one more question, too, before we go. How's your son doing? Can you give us an update on how his game's going?
Yeah, right now he's still alive in the American Hockey League. He's part of the Minnesota Wild organization. He's been in training camp for 5 weeks. He started with the prospects camp, then the NHL camp, and then the American League camp. And in the last 4 days, they've made 13 cuts, and he's fortunate so far that he hasn't been one of them. And so hopefully he'll start the season in the American Hockey League, and we'll see where it goes from there. But so far, so good. I'm really proud of him. He's done a good job.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome.
Well, we really appreciate the time, Pierre. Looking forward to having you back in the Berg for a good chunk of the season. You've been a player, a coach, a scout, an analyst, and it's going to be great to have you as part of the Pittsburgh Penguins media organization.
Thanks, Pierre.
I'm so thrilled. Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Jay. Jay, you get that golf game going.
He needs to golf more, Pierre.
Yeah, I know. I always say I don't golf. Everybody says there's never enough.
I'll be his caddy. I'll just be his caddy when he plays against Mario. It's all fine.
You know, Pierre, we are living vicariously through you. You know, we know True 5, we know down south. We're looking to see that. But hey, big man, listen, we really appreciate you coming out and joining us. You got so many people pulling you in different directions. Larry and I are thrilled you're able to join us.
Yeah, safe travels.
Man. You have no idea. Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Jay. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the season.
Great conversation with Pierre McGuire. He's just such a down-to-earth, knowledgeable hockey mind.
Yeah, and he is so thrilled to be back here. We know that he's always loves doing anything to help Mario, but then the Penguins and what the Penguins meant to him. So I'm really happy to see him back.
And we want to thank Ryan Jorgen and Logan Douglas, One Team Media with Brian Hess, and our strategic partner with my employer, Odyssey Pittsburgh, and Michael Spacciapoli.
Also to Dave Rourke, the Rourke Automotive Group. Thanks again for being our title sponsor. We talked about the Rourke Advantage, lifetime state inspections, lifetime oil changes, engine warranty. They've been great, and glad he's a part of it.
That's this episode of Offset with Larry and the Big Man. Next time, Dave Ricchini will join us. We got a lot to talk about on Thursday. That's a wrap.